away. Hi, everybody. No.
Hi, guys.
Hi, everybody. I am Willie Russell.
And I'm Jill Russell. And together we're Advntr Studio.
We are a small design and animation studio in Brooklyn, New York.
I'm primarily the designer, illustrator, and art director.
And I do the 3D design and animation and 2D animation.
And here's a few pieces of work that we like.
No. What we do goes a little something like this.
Cool.
Here's the reel.
No, I like the one before.
What did I say before?
And here's a little
example of what we do. So that was a collection of some of our favorite stuff we've done recently. As you can see, we do a lot of Cinema 4D, and in collaborating in these pieces, it almost starts with Jill sketching something.
So while Willie is the main Cinema 4D designer, it always starts with me sketching out a character or a scene, and that's where our main collaboration happens.
Yeah. So for example, in this recent post we did about a person running on a treadmill towards the fridge. Jill started out with these sketches.
Yeah, and they usually start on a notebook and sometimes the iPad. And it's just us going back and forth what we think the story should be. And then I'll bring it into Illustrator and do the different poses that Willie needs to reference when he takes the character into Cinema 4D.
I will build and rig the character, and then we'll sort of just together we'll build the scene around it. So what we're going to be talking about today specifically is how we create one of our favorite things to animate, hands.
Hands are a great thing to learn because they can help tell a story.
Yeah, they're very emotive. You can do a lot with them, and creating them easily and stylistically in Cinema 4D is a huge tool in our arsenal that we use in most projects. We obviously like using hands in our work a lot. So today we're going to show you guys how we model, rig, and use stop motion or cell animation techniques in Cinema 4D to create these hands.
And I'll take Willie's render into Photoshop. Hey! And then I'll take Willie's render into Photoshop and draw on top of it to help finish the look. We like adding some hand-drawn elements on top of the 3D to give it more of a handmade feel. So as far as our design or style, I think Willie and I both appreciate kind of the unusual, quirky character design. Obviously a lot of our characters are breaking the rules as far as like the natural human form, but I think that's what creativity is all about. We like to create these unique characters, but there's always this lighthearted or human story behind them. Like getting hit in the face as a kid playing dodgeball, or trying to work out at home during this quarantine just because we've been snacking too much. We start with a story that's relatable and then come up with a unique design to help tell that story. In this case, we thought about the idea of being creatively blocked. So in the beginning of this animation, we have this character kind of fiddling around with a pencil, which is kind of something we all do when we're stuck or, can't think of anything. So we wanted to illustrate that, but we also wanted to illustrate that eureka moment when you actually have an idea and you're ready to put your pencil down to paper. So we thought that you can easily show this story of determination through a hand. So that's what we created, and that's what we'll be showing you today.
Boom, so this is what we're gonna create today. So we're gonna go into Cinema now, and we're going to model and rig this hand. And then we're going to animate it using hold keyframes, frame by frame, to create the final look. As a motion graphics artist, kind of diving into the world of modeling and rigging and animating actual characters within cinema was always extremely intimidating. But introducing these skills into my tool set were one of the biggest shifts in my career I've ever had, because the possibilities literally become endless when you learn some of these basic modeling and rigging techniques. The things that I'm about to show you really opened up a whole different world of cinema to me, even as, mainly starting as an After Effects artist. So let's dive into Cinema 4D. Okay, so here we are, and to build the hand, we are just going to use the box modeling technique. And that entails clicking right here and getting ourselves a cube, and then we're going to use some tools to sculpt our hand from just this cube. So what I usually do is click on the cube and press C, or come over here and click this, make editable. And so we'll press C, and now the cube is editable. If you're not familiar with a lot of the modeling keyboard shortcuts, I'll usually come over to Select and hold this bar right here to undock that menu so you have it on your right hand side, and also your mesh tools here. So that bar, there you go. So now these are most of the tools that we'll use to create the hand. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna have the cube and we're gonna drop it. I hold Alt and click on the subdivision surface object to drop that cube inside of it. Once you click on your cube, if you're in a point or edges editing mode or the polygons, you'll be able to see the original cube edges around the subdivision surface object. So you drop the cube into a subdivision surface object, then you can come over here to your cut modes, and there's this loop path cut, or it could be KL or ML. I usually use KL because I remember K as in knife. So if you press K, you'll see your cut options. So KL is the loop cut, and you can cut the cube close to the edges to get this nice beveled edge towards that. Yeah, box modeling, we're just going to cut around the square and extrude faces to create our hand. So let's start over. Let's just create a new cube. Press C to make it editable, and then hold Alt, or I think it's Option on a Mac, and click your subdivision surface object, and it will be inside there. So we're just gonna start creating the hand. I'm gonna get my loop path cut, and I'm gonna cut one down here. I'm gonna cut it more like right here, and another one right here. So it's making it more of a cylinder. It looks more like a wrist or something. Our fingers are gonna extrude from the top of this, and we're gonna extrude our thumb from this side right here. So if I go into point mode, I can select this point. You can either come over here to your extrude object, or you can do the quick shortcut D. Press D, and then you can just pull that out. Sorry, click the polygon and pull that out. Now, my favorite way to extrude things is, instead of going to the tool at all, let's say you're just in your selection mode, you select the polygon, you can just hold Control and pull on the axis here, and that will also extrude it. So that's a quick way to do it. So hold Control and pull it out. I'm gonna stop there. I'm gonna pull it again. So the thumb has this nice cut here where I think the joint will be. So we're gonna kind of create a cute hand with just a thumb, and then a stubby thumb, and then 3 stubby fingers on top. So that's a super wide thumb, so I'm just gonna select the polygon, press T to get my scale mode, and scale that so the end of the thumb is almost a square. And then you can go into your edges mode and over in your selections, loop selection, or the keyboard shortcut is UL. Then you can select that second one, press T to go to scale, and scale it down. So at this point, we're just trying to get our main appendages out of this cube. We're not necessarily worrying about the design and the look quite yet. We can screw with all of that after we get all the appendages made. So that's our big thumb. And now let's go into our loop cut again. And we're gonna just do a couple even cuts here and here so we can create these polygons that we can pull our fingers out of. So since if you look at our hand, it gets skinnier from where your wrist goes to where your knuckles start. We are going to go into point mode, and we make sure in our rectangle selection that only select visible elements is unchecked. So we can select all of this, hold T, and just make that a little bit skinnier. So the base is staying this cube, and then we're just gonna kind of make things a little skinnier as we go up. So back to the rectangle tool, let's select just these top polygons as well. Press T and make those a little bit skinnier as well. Just kind of folding our hand to the top where these fingers are gonna come out of. And I want these 3 polygons at the top to kind of be as closest to a square as possible, so they're even. So this middle one's a little bit wider, so we're just gonna hold T and make that a little bit more like a square. So yeah, these 3 are pretty close to even sized squares because I want all the fingers to be even thickness. So after we have all these polygons the size we want them, I'm gonna go to our extrude inner tool, or the keyboard shortcut is MW. So MW. And you can select this, and I just want to extrude inner just a tiny bit. So in the offset here, I'm going to change it to just something like 0.5, just a tiny bit, so it creates a little bit of distance, or a tiny bit of space in between each finger. Do an even offset for each, so all 3 are just inner extruded just by 0.5 centimeters. So now we got the base of our fingers. And from this base, we're just gonna do the same thing we did with the thumb, is pull it up twice. You can go to your extrude tool or just hold hold Control and pull that up once to create the first knuckle, let it go, hold Control and pull it again to create the second part of the finger. So that's like our pinky, so that'll be the shortest one. The next one is our middle finger, since we only have 3 fingers other than the thumb here. So that'll be a little bit longer. And then we want our third one, the index finger, I guess, to be not as long as the middle, but a little bit longer than the pinky. Now that we have all of our appendages pulled out and basically in the place that we like them, we can start just messing with the scale of things to get the design we want. So at this point, what I like to do is get into our edge selection mode and our loop selection, and I'll just start selecting these edge loops and moving and scaling them to get the design I like. So I want to move this down a little bit because the top of this, the closer to the top of the finger, kind of the fatter the end will be, and I just kind of want them to be like rounded strokes, even length. So right about there looks good. And so now we'll go back to the loop selection, or UL, and we'll select this one. Just bring it down. Actually, that looks good right there. A nice rounded top. And this one is not quite rounded enough, so UL, we'll select that and move it down a little bit. So So I like the way those 3 fingers look. The hand itself is looking a little blocky, but I'll show you how we fix that after we get the fingers we like. So here now I'm just selecting all the edge loops of the thumb and parts of the hand, and I am just scaling them in the X and the Y axis to get the shape and thickness that I like. So before I forget, we're going to extend this down so we get the full arm. So we'll go into our polygon mode and select these 3 polygons, and let's hold hold Control and pull on the axis here to extrude it. And I'll just do it like halfway down there, and then I'll do another one to kind of pull it all the way down. And then one more small one to kind of make it a nice beveled edge on the bottom. So this looks a little funny because it's like this blocky, almost rectangular block that kind of just forms into this hand. So let's make the arm a little bit thinner, because looking at my hand right now, the edges of my hand kind of come to a point at my wrist. So let's go back into our rectangle selection and select basically everything from here down. Remember, only select visible elements is checked off, so that is, be sure to select everything. So hold back T, or press T to get into your scale tool. Let's just bring that in a little bit here and a little bit here. So now we have this kind of curve happening from the wrist. So now it's still looking a little blocky though. So to make this a little bit more cylindrical, we're going to use the iron tool. So you can come over here to your iron tool, use the keyboard shortcut MG, and with our point selected, you can just kind of click and drag a little bit. And if you come over here to percentage, you can have some more granular control over that. You can just kind of do it to your liking, but basically what it's doing is pulling the points around to make it more circular. So usually at this point, I just kind of go back and forth and mess around until I get the look that I'm looking for. So I'm actually gonna undo that and make the wrist a little bit thicker. Let's iron it first, and then we'll mess with the scale of it. So now again, we'll come over to the iron tool and select this MG, or just click right here. And I'll just kind of start it off by doing that. Let's just go for 50%. Let's do actually 60%. Cool. And then now if we go back to T, now we can kind of scale it down a little bit more. I like how that's looking. This side of the hand is looking a little bit flat. Like your hand is a little bit more rounded at that area. So let's iron that section as well. So back into the cube. We can go back to the rectangle selection tool, and this time I'm going to only select visible elements. I'm going to have that checked on. So when I select these 4 points that I want to iron, it's not selecting everything behind it as well. So now this is where it comes down to personal preference. We just kind of look around. You can go to your 4 modes and 4 views and make sure you like how it looks from all angles. I feel like the wrist is still looking a little bit too thick from the side. Go to our rectangle tool and let's only select visible elements, have that unchecked, and select all that. Let's make it a little bit thinner. Now I'm going to go to my display, and I like looking at it with the quick shading lines, just so you can see how the modeling is. And as you can see, all the mesh is super clean, and I think I like the look of this. I think this thing's ready to be rigged. Before we rig, I'm going to name this hand, I like to just duplicate it before I do anything to it and hide the duplicate, or sometimes I'll create a null and call this archive and just have that constantly hidden. So all my steps I can just keep in the archive and they'll be hidden. Before we rig, I am going to increase the subdivisions just to 3. I think that's all we need to get some smooth rigging and weighting. And I'm going to click on the subdivision object and make it editable. This is our object that is ready to be rigged. But if you want to make any changes to the modeling, we still have this in our archive. So kind of at every step of the way, I'll duplicate something and drop the old one into the archive just so I have it. Okay, so now let's rig this bad boy. So to start, I was always really scared of rigging, and I still am, but it's really not that bad, especially just using the joint tool and using auto weight to get some nice weighting. And there's a couple tricks I'll show you. So go into character and we'll go into our joint tool. And I think the best view to do this for our hand, we'll come over here to the front view. And we'll just start by we hold control and click right here to make our first joint. So I'm just gonna go at the tip here, which I'll kind of call the shoulder, even though the arm's not super long, but we'll just call it the shoulder. Go in the middle here, and we'll call this the elbow. And then we'll make another joint at the wrist. The wrist bend will probably be right around here. Now from the wrist, we'll come up here and create a joint kind of right above the center of your palm. And from here, we'll start creating the fingers. So what I like to do is at this point, name them: shoulder, elbow, wrist, and palm. All the fingers will be nestled within the palm joint. So with the palm joint selected, you can hold control and we'll create our first finger, which is the pinky over here. So I'm first going to do a joint that's directly sideways. So it goes directly under the pinky, and then one that starts right at the base of the pinky, and then control the joint for the middle of the pinky, and then control and the joint at the tip. This is a stylized hand, so I just like the idea of it. It only has 4 fingers. We just have this one bending point in the middle of our fingers, and that's how we'll control it. And this might not be in the exact right place, but I like to kind of just quickly rig everything, and then we can go back and fine tune where these points are. That was the pinky. So now we go back and select the palm joint and control click. Whoops. Palm joint. I went inside the joint tool. Let's come back up here and click on our joint tool. I'm gonna click off the root null. I don't like them creating a root null every time we make a new joint. So we'll just delete that, no root null. Click back on the palm and go to our joint tool and hold control. And now we can create a new joint for the middle, and that's nested right under the palm, just like the pinky was. So we'll do one at the base of the middle finger, one in the middle, and then one on the tip. And let's repeat that for the index finger. We'll come, like we did with the pinky, we'll come over to the right and then straight up. On the pinky and the index, I'm not sure if you need this bone at all, but I've just found that my weighting is a little bit cleaner when I have this bone coming perpendicular out and then up, instead of just having one go directly here. So I like having it come perpendicular over to kind of like where that pad of your finger would be, and then a joint up to the base, and then a new joint right in the center where the bend is, and then a joint point on the tip. And now we'll just do the thumb. So come back, click on the palm, because that's where we want the bone to come out of, and we'll click right here. It's kind of where like the pad of your thumb is, and then the base of the thumb, the middle bend point, and then the tip. So now that we have all our bones basically placed inside of our hand, I'm just going to go back and fine tune the positions a little bit. If you hold 7, then with the joint tool, you can select each point and move them individually without affecting the other joints in the hierarchy here. So I'm just going to make sure that that's right at that point. I feel like this should, yeah, I think that's a good bend point. It's a lot cleaner when you're animating if these joints are placed on an edge of the mesh here. And then holding 7, just moving that to the tip exactly. So I'm just going to go through and make sure all these joints are exactly where I want them to be. Okay, cool. So we've fine-tuned the placement of all the points of the joints, and now you can see our little skeleton inside of our hand there, and it's nice and centered. So now we can bind all of our joints with the mesh that is the hand here. So select all of your joints and the hand that you want the mesh to be, and then you can come to Character, Bind. And so that creates this little skin deformer on the hand mesh and gives this weight tag on it. So now you should be able to, you can click on all your joints and pose your hand, and yeah, it's looking not bad. Like the weighting that Cinema 4D naturally does, especially for something like this, is usually pretty good. But to get a super clean weighting on the mesh, and by weighting I mean what parts of the mesh and to what degree does each joint affect. And sometimes when you're animating a whole character, that can get super messy, as in you're bending their arm and their entire shoulder is getting wonky, and you can kind of see it happening here when we're bending the finger. Some of this geometry gets a little funky. I wouldn't worry about it in this case, but it can get bad. But this is not looking bad at all. But yeah, so a quick trick that I really like to do, and I don't even know if it's a trick, but this is what I do almost every time I rig something. If you hold Shift and you double click this weight tag, then your weight manager will come up, and you can come into the joints tab and select all of the joints and kind of see color coded of what each joint or where and how much on the mesh each joint is affecting. Like I said, Cinema does a pretty good job of weighting these things automatically, but you can just kind of see in these areas where it's transitioning between the joints and the weighting of the joints, it just gets a little choppy, and when you're animating the hand, this could cause some like weird funky things happening with the geometry. So to make sure that doesn't happen, what I always do is I'll come in here, I'll select every single joint, and under commands we can go to 0. So it completely zeroes them out. They would not be affecting the mesh at all. And again, with all the joints selected, I'll then come into auto weight and count the number of joints, which is 19. And I'll type in the number of joints there. I usually use a fall off strength of 75 and a distance of 50, but depending on how dense your mesh is, you can mess with those parameters. But I'm just gonna calculate, and there you go. Now the blending of the weights of the joints are a lot smoother, and you're gonna run into a lot less problems. And if you want them even smoother, you can always come into options, smoothing, and adjust the strength here and click smooth. And you can just keep on clicking it, and you'll see these things blending more and more and more and more. So zeroing out and reweighting the rig on this hand wasn't super necessary, but I do this a lot on the characters that we build. So let's sidetrack just for 1 second, and let's go back to this character. This is the character that we built for the treadmill animation we showed earlier. So just like the hand, we use box modeling to model this character. Each individual piece, including these hands that you might recognize, We just started off with a box and cut it and pulled and pushed points to create this character, all based off of Jill's drawings. And you can make pretty much anything using box modeling, especially in this sort of style that we use. And then we use Cinema's character tool to build the rig for our characters. And this character tool is really awesome. We won't get too deep into it, but you can create all the bones you need from this menu. And then you use these control points to place everything. It does it all symmetrically, and it's super clean and produces a super solid rig. So I placed all the control points. It was really easy. And once everything is placed, you bind the whole skeleton with your actual character geo, which with the character builder you just do by coming down here to binding and dragging all the geo you need to be combined with the skeleton right here. And then you can come over here to animate, and in the display I like to make visible just the controllers. So now on your character over here, we're just seeing all the main points that you can click and control. And so now that we're binded, we should be able to move, which yes we can, but as you can see, this is where the weighting comes in. For characters like this that don't have realistic proportions and limbs are detached, the weighting is going to be pretty weird. Basically, we're seeing the weighting of the torso bleeding into the legs and vice versa, which causes a lot of weird stuff. A lot of just funky things are happening everywhere. And we want these legs to be affected by the whole skeleton, but we don't want them to be affected by anything the torso is doing, and vice versa. So this is where zeroing out the weights and re-auto-weighting them limb by limb really comes in handy. So we're just gonna do that. Since we binded our whole character and the character is still made of individual pieces, there's only one skin tag inside this null, but each piece got its own weight tag. So let's just do the legs, since they're the most important part in this character and they're completely separate pieces from the torso. So this will kind of illustrate our point the best. So we're just going to start with the left leg, and the legs are divided into two pieces as a stylistic choice, but if we do the same thing with both of these pieces, they will be affected in the same way. So I'll show you. So leg one, we'll hold shift and double click on the weight manager here, and we'll just do the same thing we did with the hand. We'll come into command and zero out the weights so it has nothing. And now in the joint tab, it's a little bit more complicated because you have a full character, but we can come into our left leg and select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those 5 main joints, and come back into auto weight. We have the 5 joints and calculate. So we're just going to do the exact same thing with the top half of the leg. See, this is where it's being affected. You can paint that off, but just a quicker and cleaner way is what we're doing. Shift, double click the weight tag on this leg 2 as well, and inside the joints, inside the command, we'll zero it out, and in the joints we will select those same left leg joints, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and in auto weight have 5 joints, calculate, and that's super clean. That's just using the leg joints. They're still connected to the skeleton as a whole, but it will only be affected by the leg joints. So we can move and twist the torso, and these will not be affected. So let's do the same thing for the right leg. So click on the right leg. Because the weight manager is already open, you don't have to shift double click it every time. You can just make sure that the correct weight tag is selected. Come into commands, and we will zero it out. Joints, make sure the right leg joints are connected, and we have all these nice labels because we built it with the Cinema's character tool. So select those 5 right leg joints and calculate that. Now we'll do the same thing with the top half of the right leg. Zero it out. Select those 5 joints and we'll auto weight it. And now if we come and select our hip controller and start moving them around, now that's super nice. The legs are moving completely on their own. They're not getting deformed by what would be like the backside or the hips of the torso. They are their own thing. And now we would do that same exact thing for this whole torso piece, the hands, and the head. And that's how we get these clean geos on these interesting characters that we make. So yeah, let's go back into the hand and finish that up. Just so I know which finger is what, I'm just going to rename the first joint in all these little trees here. And now we can just kind of come in here and mess with it a little bit, and everything's bending and deforming super smooth. Peace. Cool. So I'm liking the design of the hand. I'm liking how the deformation of the mesh with the rigging is looking pretty smooth. So I would say this bad boy is ready to be animated. One thing I like to do before I start animating is pull out the joints that I know I'll be animating the most onto our, let's say, canvas here, so we have quick access to them. So I'll be using the wrist a lot. I'll be using, the first and second joints of this thumb, which I'll call thumb base and thumb knuckle. And I'm just gonna do that for each finger because I know I'll be clicking on these and I don't want to have to go through the tree every time. Now there might be cleaner ways to do this, but that's just what I like to do. Now I have a nice visual of all of my assets that I'll be animating. You can click on them here and the properties will show up over here in the attributes tab. When you get down to it, it just is not that scary and is accessible for everyone to use, and it is such a important storytelling tool to be able to create these characters, and especially rigging and weighting was extremely scary to me. But when you start doing it, it's a lot less scary than you think. So just dive into it and kind of don't worry about how much you're going to mess up, because you're going to mess up a lot, but it's there for you to use, and Cinema makes it so easy and accessible, and you can make some really cool stuff using these techniques. So we're going to dive into animation now, because the animation we're creating, a person spinning a pencil in his fingers and throwing it in the air and then catching it is pretty complex movement. So we are going to take that complex movement and break it down into more digestible bits using key poses. Here I have opened up my timeline and I am looking at my own hand and moving these joints into our key poses. The first pose being the pencil on the pinky, and the next being the pencil on the middle finger, and so on. I pose the hand how I like, and then keyframe all the joints using hold keyframes. I'm spacing them all out at increments of 8 frames as I pose them initially. Once I am done with the key poses, I play through the animation, and you can now easily move your hold keyframes to adjust the timing. I want things to happen a little slower at the beginning of the twirl and then ramp up to the point where the hand flicks the pencil into the air. Now that the key poses are all in place and the bulk of our movement is looking clear, we can start looking at what will happen in between the key poses. As I add more hold keyframes, I will drag them closer or further apart to dial in the timing as we go. with all my in-between poses in, the animation is feeling pretty complete now. I didn't animate the pencil spinning in the air because I know Jill is going to do that in Photoshop. So now I will render this animation as a reference for Jill to draw on top of.
Okay, so now I'm bringing in Willie's render into Photoshop, and I'm bringing it in as a new video layer. Create a new video layer and basically trace or draw on top of what we discussed is we wanted the pencil to be line drawings and have more of a hand-drawn feel because we thought that that would be a cool look. So I'm just going in, drawing this pencil frame by frame in its most basic form. And then after that, I add in some smear frames, which is the frames in between big movements. So they're kind of like more abstract and more goofy looking. And it looks weird at first when you're just drawing it single frame, but when you play it back, it really adds and makes the pencil really feel like it's moving and flipping up in the air. And along with all of the smear frames, I also add little lines because that added to more of the hand-drawn feel and exaggerated all of the movement that was happening. Once the pencil is fully animated in Photoshop, I'm going to export these frames as a PNG sequence with alpha, and we will take it into After Effects to composite it with Willie's lit and textured 3D render. And voila! Here's the final piece. We think it turned out pretty cool. Combining the quirky 3D hand design with a more hand-drawn element, like the pencil, made the final product pretty interesting and unique. Trying to marry two contrasting styles is never easy, but we love to experiment with more and more ways to blend the two in a cool way.
Wow, what a journey.
We hope you guys learned a few new tips and tricks today. Remember, it all started with just a concept and a quick sketch.
We then learned some box modeling techniques to create a fun hand, and we even rigged that bad boy.
We also went over using hold frames and key poses to break down a complex movement into simple, digestible parts.
And that got us to here. So thanks for being here, and now we can open up the floor to some questions.